13 days that nearly ended the world. The Cuban Missile Crisis. Part 1. October 1962. The photos that changed everything. High above the earth, at nearly 70,000 feet, a single aircraft moved silently across the sky. It wasn't a bomber. It wasn't a fighter jet. It carried no weapons. But what it carried was far more dangerous. Inside the cockpit of a U-2 reconnaissance plane, the pilot flew alone. No backup, no protection, no room for error. Below him, the island of Cuba stretched out like a quiet tropical paradise. Palm trees, open fields, small towns. Nothing unusual. At least, that's what it looked like. Because hidden among those fields, something was being built. Something that should never have been there. The pilot didn't know exactly what he would find. His mission was simple. Take photos, come back alive. But missions like this were never simple. Because this was 1962, and the world was already on edge. The United States and the Soviet Union, two superpowers locked in a silent war, not with bullets, not with tanks, but with fear. This was the Cold War, a war where every move mattered, every decision echoed globally, and one mistake could end everything. Back in Washington, officials had been receiving reports, strange activity in Cuba, unusual shipments, increased military presence. At first, they weren't sure what it meant, but they suspected something serious. That's why the U-2 was sent, to see the truth. Click, click, click. High above, the pilot activated the camera. Thousands of feet below, hidden installations were captured frame by frame. Long shadows, geometric shapes, unnatural lines cutting through the landscape. These were not farms. These were not civilian structures. These were military, and not just any military. Missile sites, under construction, carefully placed, strategically positioned, and aimed at the United States. The pilot didn't know it yet, but those photographs would bring the world closer to nuclear war than it had ever been before. Transition sound, tape rewind. Hours later, back in the United States, the film was rushed into analysis. Experts leaned over light tables, studying every detail, every shadow, every shape, and slowly, the truth became undeniable. These were Soviet nuclear missile bases in Cuba, just 90 miles from American shores. That distance changed everything, because nuclear weapons were no longer far away. They were close, too close. Pause. Within minutes, the information reached the highest levels, the White House, and one man, the President of the United States, John F. Kennedy. He looked at the photos, carefully, silently. No dramatic reaction, no immediate words, but those around him noticed something, a shift, because he understood something instantly. This wasn't just intelligence, this was a threat, a direct one. Low tone. If those missiles became operational, they could strike American cities in minutes. No warning, no time to react. Millions of lives dependent on decisions that hadn't even been made yet. Heartbeat sound grows. Kennedy knew one thing. He couldn't ignore this. But acting too fast could start a war, a nuclear war. Silence. And once that starts, there is no control.
Slow zoom out. So in that moment, holding those photos, the world unknowingly stood at the edge, not of conflict, but of destruction. Soft whisper tone. And it all began with a single flight and a few photographs.
Part 2. The Secret Room. The ticking was finally audible. The photos were real. That much was clear. But what they meant was something far more complicated. Inside the White House, a decision was made almost immediately. This information could not go public. Not yet. Because if the world found out too soon, panic would spread, markets would crash, allies would react, enemies would prepare, and within hours, the situation could spiral out of control. So instead, something else happened. A secret group was formed, a small circle of men hand-picked by the president. Military leaders, intelligence experts, political advisors. This group would later be known as ExComm, the Executive Committee of the National Security Council. They gathered in a closed room, no press, no announcements, no leaks, just one goal: figure out what to do. At the center of it all sat the president, John Kennedy. Calm on the outside, but fully aware that every word spoken in that room could change history. The music slowly rises. The first option came quickly. Airstrike. Simple, direct, decisive. Destroy the missile sites before they become operational. Military leaders strongly supported it. They believed speed was critical. Take them out now before it's too late. But there was a problem, a big one. Those missile sites weren't empty. They were operated by Soviet personnel, which meant an airstrike wouldn't just destroy weapons, it would kill Soviet soldiers. And that was an act of war. A heavy silence. And not just any war, a war with the Soviet Union. Another option was suggested: full invasion of Cuba. Remove the threat completely, take control of the island, end the problem at its source. But again, the risks were enormous. Because Cuba wasn't alone, it was backed by the Soviet Union, led by Nikita Khrushchev, a man known for bold decisions and unpredictable reactions. If the United States invaded Cuba, the Soviets might respond elsewhere: Berlin, Europe, or worse, with nuclear weapons. That's when the room changed. Because suddenly, this wasn't just about Cuba anymore. It was about the entire world. A slow pacing. One advisor leaned forward and said, "If we attack, we might start a chain reaction we can't stop." That word again, chain reaction. Because in nuclear strategy, everything is connected. One move leads to another, then another, until there's no way back. The soft ticking continues. So if not attack, then what? Another idea emerged. Do nothing. Wait. Watch. Avoid escalation. But that option felt even more dangerous, because every day they waited, those missiles got closer to being ready, closer to launch, closer to destruction. Time was not neutral. Time was working against them. Then came a fourth option, less aggressive, but still powerful. A naval blockade. Surround Cuba. Stop Soviet ships. Prevent more weapons from arriving. Apply pressure without immediate violence. It wasn't perfect, but it bought time. And in a situation like this, time was everything. The room debated for hours. Voices rose, arguments sharpened, Tension filled every corner, because no matter what they chose, there would be consequences, serious ones. Finally, all eyes turned back to Kennedy, because in the end, this decision was his, and his alone. He looked around the room, at the faces, at the pressure, at the weight of the moment, and he understood something deeply. There was no safe choice, only less dangerous ones, and whatever he decided would determine whether the world moved forward or ended in nuclear fire.
Part 3. The Blockade. The decision had been made. Not invasion, not immediate airstrike. Something else. Measured, calculated, dangerous in its own way. A naval blockade. But even that word was too aggressive, so they changed it. They called it a quarantine, because in diplomacy, words matter. A blockade is an act of war. A quarantine sounds defensive, less threatening, less likely to trigger immediate retaliation. But make no mistake, this was still a direct confrontation between two nuclear superpowers. Orders were sent. The U.S. Navy began moving, ships deployed across the Atlantic, forming a line around Cuba, a line that Soviet ships would not be allowed to cross. At sea, American sailors took their positions. They didn't know everything, but they knew enough. This wasn't routine. This was serious. Because somewhere beyond the horizon, Soviet ships were already on their way, carrying more equipment, possibly more missiles. And soon, those ships would face a choice: stop or continue and risk confrontation. A deep heartbeat. Back in Washington, another decision was made. This time, not in secret. The American people had to be told. Sound shift, TV static, then clarity. On October 22, 1962, the president addressed the nation. Millions watched. Families gathered around televisions. Living rooms fell silent. And then, John F. Kennedy spoke. His voice was calm, steady, but the message was heavy. He revealed the truth. Soviet nuclear missiles had been discovered in Cuba, just miles from American soil. Pause. You could feel the shift. Across the country, people listening, realizing, understanding. This was real. Soft tension music. Kennedy announced the quarantine. No more weapons would be allowed into Cuba. Any attempt to break the line would be stopped. He made it clear, this nation will regard any nuclear missile launched from Cuba as an attack by the Soviet Union on the United States. Silence. And that statement meant one thing. War was now a real possibility. Heartbeat grows stronger. Across America, fear spread. Not chaos, not panic, but something quieter, more personal. People began thinking, what if this is it? What if this is the moment everything changes? Soft ambient tone. Schools prepared emergency drills. Families discussed plans. Some built shelters. Others just waited, watching, listening, hoping. Ocean sound returns. Meanwhile, out at sea, the situation was reaching its peak. American ships stood in position, watching the horizon, waiting. And then they appeared. Soviet ships, moving steadily toward the blockade line. Music rises, intense. No one spoke, because everyone knew what this moment meant. If those ships kept moving, the United States would have to act. And once that happens, there's no turning back. Deep silence. Back in Washington,
The room was tense again, eyes fixed on reports, updates coming in, distance decreasing, closer and closer and closer, heartbeat pounding. Then came the question, what will they do? No one answered, because no one knew. And at that exact moment, the world held its breath.
Part 4. The Line in the Ocean. Out in the Atlantic, there was no noise of cities, no voices of crowds, just water. Endless, silent, unforgiving water. And on that water, two forces moved toward each other. On one side, the United States Navy. On the other, Soviet ships, each carrying more than cargo. They carried decisions, consequences, and possibly the beginning of nuclear war. A low radar ping, steady heartbeat. The blockade line had been drawn, not with ink, not on paper, but with ships. A physical line in the middle of the ocean. Cross it, and everything changes. American sailors stood ready, hands near controls, eyes fixed forward. They had orders, clear ones, stop the ships, no matter what. But no matter what has a cost, because on those Soviet ships were men just like them, following orders, not wanting war, but prepared for it. Slow zoom, Soviet convoy. The distance between them shrank. Miles turned into kilometers, kilometers into visual range. Now they could see each other, steel against steel, flags flying, invisible tension, but overwhelming. Heartbeat faster now. Back in Washington, updates came in rapidly. Contact confirmed, ships approaching line, no change in speed. Every word felt heavier than the last, because this wasn't just information, it was a countdown. Clock ticking, louder. In the White House, John F. Kennedy sat quietly, listening, waiting, knowing that somewhere out there, a single decision by someone he would never meet could decide everything. A soft whisper tone. Would they stop? Or would they keep going? Music builds slowly, intense. Out at sea, the moment arrived. The Soviet ships reached the line, the invisible boundary that meant everything. American forces prepared, commands ready, tension at its peak. Silence, complete. And then, something unexpected happened. The ships slowed. Heartbeat pauses, then resumes slower. At first, no one believed it. Maybe it was temporary, maybe it was a maneuver. But then, the confirmation came in. They were stopping. Some ships even began turning back. Music releases slightly, but still tense. A wave of relief moved through the room. Not celebration, not victory, just relief. Because for that moment, the line had held. War had been avoided. Barely. Soft tone. But the crisis was far from over. Because even though the ships had stopped, the missiles still were in Cuba, still being prepared, still a threat. A low, ominous sound returns, and the man behind those ships, Nikita Khrushchev, had not made his final move yet. Pause. This was not the end. It was just the first step away from disaster. Soft whisper. And sometimes the most dangerous moments come after the first relief. Part 5. The Letters. The ships had stopped. For a moment, the world exhaled. But only for a moment. because the real battle was no longer at sea. It had moved somewhere else, into words. In Washington, a message arrived, not through television, not through public channels, but directly, privately, from the Soviet Union, from the man at the center of it all, Nikita Khrushchev. The letter was long, personal, almost emotional. It didn't sound like a threat, it sounded like a warning. Khrushchev spoke of fear, of misunderstanding, of the danger both nations faced. He wrote as a leader, but also as a man who understood what nuclear war would mean. And then he made an offer. The Soviet Union would remove the missiles from Cuba, but only if the United States promised one thing: not to invade Cuba. Silence. It was the first real opening, a possible way out, a path that didn't lead to war. Music softened slightly. Inside the White House, there was cautious hope. This could work. This could end the crisis. But before they could respond, another message arrived. This one, very different. Shorter, more direct, more demanding. This time, the condition had changed. Now Khrushchev wanted something more. The United States must remove its nuclear missiles from Turkey, missiles that were aimed at the Soviet Union. Heavy pause. The room froze, because now this wasn't just about Cuba anymore. It was about balance, power, and global positioning. Tension rises. If the U.S. agreed, it might look weak. If it refused, the crisis could escalate again. Twee letters, two different tones, two different demands, and only one chance to respond correctly. Clock ticking resumes. Time was slipping again. Every hour without a response increased the risk, because uncertainty creates pressure, and pressure leads to mistakes. Music builds slowly. Kennedy and his advisors faced a critical choice. Which message should they answer? The first one, the emotional, less aggressive offer? Or the second, the harder demand that involved U.S. missiles in Turkey? Pause. Respond to the wrong one and everything could fall apart. One advisor said quietly, "We have to choose carefully. This might be our last move." Because in this situation, there were no second chances. Soft tension continues. Kennedy thought deeply, not just about strategy, but about consequences. Lives, millions of lives. Heartbeat slow but strong. Then he made a decision, a risky one. He would respond only to the first letter, ignore the second, act as if it never arrived. Silence. It was a gamble, because if Khrushchev insisted on the second demand, the entire plan could collapse. But if he accepted the first, the crisis might end. Music slowly rises, hopeful but tense. The reply was prepared, carefully worded, offering exactly what was asked in the first letter: no invasion of Cuba in exchange for removal of missiles. Pause. And then it was sent across the world to a man holding the same weight. And now everything depended on how he would respond.
Part 6. Black Saturday. October 27th, 1962. Later known as Black Saturday. The most dangerous day in human history. Because on this day, everything that could go wrong almost did. The message from Washington had been sent, but no reply had come yet. And that silence was terrifying. Because silence in a crisis like this means uncertainty. And uncertainty
creates risk. Then, suddenly, new reports started coming in. Not from Cuba, not from Washington, but from the skies. An American U-2 spy plane had been shot down over Cuba. The pilot was dead. Inside the White House, the room froze, because this changed everything. This wasn't a warning, this was an attack. And in military terms, that demanded a response. Generals immediately pushed for action. We have to strike back. Airstrikes, invasion, immediate retaliation. The pressure on the president became overwhelming, because now doing nothing looked like weakness. But Kennedy paused, because he understood something critical. What if this wasn't ordered by Moscow? What if it was a local decision, a mistake, a moment of panic by someone on the ground? If he responded too quickly, he might start a war no one actually intended to begin. So he made a choice. He did nothing. No immediate retaliation, no strike, just restraint. Long pause. That decision alone may have saved millions of lives. But the danger wasn't over, not even close. Far below the surface of the Atlantic Ocean, another event was unfolding, one that almost no one knew about at the time. A Soviet submarine was being tracked by U.S. naval forces. The Americans didn't know this submarine carried a nuclear torpedo. Inside the submarine, conditions were extreme: heat, pressure, limited communication. And then something happened. The crew believed war had already started because of the explosions they heard nearby, depth charges used as warnings. Inside that submarine, 3 officers had to make a decision: launch the nuclear torpedo or not. 2 of them agreed. They wanted to fire because they believed this was the beginning of war. But one man refused. Vasily Arkhipov. He argued. He resisted. He held his ground. And because of him, the torpedo was never launched. Long pause. That single decision, made in the darkness of the ocean, may have prevented nuclear war. Back on land, the crisis continued, still unresolved, still fragile, but now balanced on the edge of multiple near disasters. One wrong reaction, one wrong interpretation, one moment of panic, and everything could have ended. This wasn't just strategy anymore. This was survival.
Part 7. The Final Agreement. After Black Saturday, the world changed. Not visibly, not dramatically, but internally. Because now everyone understood how close they had come. Too close. In Washington, the room felt different. Quieter. Not because the crisis was over, but because the weight of what almost happened was finally sinking in. At the same time, in Moscow, another man was thinking. Nikita Khrushchev. He had received the message from the United States, the one that responded only to his first letter, not the second. And now he had a decision to make: push harder or step back. Because he understood something too. This was no longer just a political game. This was survival, global survival.
The events of Black Saturday had shown how fragile everything was. A plane shot down, a submarine nearly launching a nuclear weapon, situations that almost slipped out of control. And once control is gone, there is no stopping what comes next. So Khrushchev made a choice, a difficult one, a controversial one, but a necessary one. On October 28, 1962, a message was broadcast, publicly, to the world. The Soviet Union would remove its missiles from Cuba, in exchange for a U.S. promise not to invade Cuba. Just like that, the tension began to break. Not instantly, but steadily, like a storm finally passing. Back in Washington, the message was received, read, understood, and for the first time in days, there was relief, real relief, because this was the outcome they had hoped for, without war, without destruction. But there was something else, something not announced publicly, something kept quiet, a secret agreement. The United States would also remove its missiles from Turkey, not immediately, not publicly, but quietly, to maintain balance and avoid embarrassment on either side. Because sometimes ending a crisis requires compromise, even if that compromise is hidden. Long pause. Ships turned back. Missiles were dismantled. Tension slowly faded, and the world stepped back from the edge. Soft whisper. Not because one side won, but because both sides chose not to lose everything. Music slowly fades into calm. The Cuban Missile Crisis was over, but what it revealed would never be forgotten.
Part 8. After the Edge. Soft wind, distant echo, slow reflective piano begins. The world didn't celebrate. There were no fireworks, no victory speeches, just silence. A quiet understanding that something terrible had almost happened. Across America, people returned to normal life. Work resumed. Schools reopened fully. Television returned to regular programming. But something felt different. Something invisible but undeniable. Soft heartbeat, calm. Because for the first time, millions of people realized nuclear war was not just a possibility, it was real, and it could happen fast. Slow tone. In homes, families talked differently. Parents looked at their children with a new awareness, not fear, but vulnerability, because they now understood how fragile everything was. Music deepened slightly. Inside government buildings, the reaction was very different. There was no relief, only analysis. What went right? What went wrong? What almost failed? Because even though the crisis ended, it exposed something dangerous. Pause. The system was not as strong as they believed. Low tone. Too many close calls, too many misunderstandings, too many moments where everything depended on luck. And luck is not a strategy. Soft tension builds again. One report described it clearly. We avoided war, but not because we were fully in control. Silence. That realization was uncomfortable, because it meant next time they might not be so lucky. Music shifts, slightly forward-moving. So changes began, quietly, strategically. The first major step, better communication. Because during the crisis, messages took too long, hours, sometimes longer, and in a nuclear standoff, hours are too much. Soft click sound. So a direct line was created, a connection between Washington and Moscow. Instant, direct. This became known as the hotline. A simple idea, but powerful, because sometimes one conversation can prevent a war. Pause. Then came another shift. Nuclear strategy itself was reevaluated, because both sides realized something terrifying. Even when leaders want peace, systems and people can still push toward war, accidentally. Soft heartbeat returns. And that's what made this crisis so dangerous. Not just intention, but miscalculation. Music builds slightly. So new rules were developed. More caution, more control, more awareness of escalation. Because escalation is easy to start, but almost impossible to stop. Pause. And perhaps the biggest change of all was psychological. Soft whisper tone. Leaders now understood each other differently, not just as enemies, but as humans facing the same risk, the same fear, the same responsibility. Music softens, emotional. Because in those 13 days, both sides saw the truth. There is no winner in nuclear war, only survivors, if any. Long pause. And that understanding created something unexpected. Not friendship, but restraint. Slow fade tone. The kind of restraint that would shape the Cold War for years to come.
Part 9. The secrets they never told. The crisis was over. At least, that's what the world believed. But the full story? That was never told. Not completely. Because behind the public agreement, there were secrets, important ones. The kind that could change how people saw everything. The world knew this. The Soviet Union agreed to remove missiles from Cuba, and the United States promised not to invade Cuba. Simple, clean. But reality was more complicated. Because there was a second deal, a hidden one, not announced, not written publicly, but very real. The United States had also agreed to remove its nuclear missiles from Turkey, missiles that were aimed directly at the Soviet Union. Why keep it secret? Because publicly, it would look like a trade, and politically, that mattered. The US didn't want to appear weak, and the Soviet Union didn't want to appear pressured. So both sides agreed to keep that part quiet. A deal that ended a crisis without anyone losing face. But that wasn't the only hidden truth. There was something even more shocking, something the American public didn't know at the time. The missiles in Cuba were already operational, some of them with nuclear warheads ready. Which means if an invasion had happened, those weapons could have been used immediately. And there's more. Soviet commanders in Cuba had permission to use those weapons if they were attacked. That means a single decision by a local commander could have started nuclear war without Moscow, without Washington. Think about that. The fate of millions, not just in the hands of presidents, but in the hands of individuals under pressure in a moment of fear. That's how close it was. And then there was another truth. During the crisis, the United States underestimated the situation. They believed the missiles were not yet ready, that there was still time. But in reality, time was already running out. If they had chosen invasion, it wouldn't have been a controlled operation. It would have been war, immediate, unstoppable. And yet,
none of this was shared with the public. Not then, not for years. Because some truths are too heavy for the moment they belong to. But inside government circles, these facts changed everything. Because they revealed something critical. The world didn't just avoid war, it avoided it by the smallest margin imaginable. Not by perfect planning, not by total control, but by a combination of restraint, luck, and a few individuals who chose not to act. And that realization was both powerful and terrifying.
Part 10. How the World Changed Forever. The crisis ended, but its impact was just beginning. Because some events in history don't just pass, they reshape everything that comes after. Pause. The Cuban Missile Crisis was one of those events. Soft heartbeat, steady. For the first time, both superpowers truly understood something. They were not just competing, they were holding the survival of the world in their hands. Music deepens. And that realization forced change. Not emotional change, strategic change, permanent change. Low tone. The first shift was in how nuclear weapons were viewed. Before the crisis, they were seen as tools of power, symbols of strength, something to build more of. But after those 13 days, they became something else, a responsibility, a danger that could not be fully controlled. Pause. Because now it wasn't theory anymore, it was experience. Music slowly builds. This led to something critical. Efforts to limit nuclear weapons, not completely, but cautiously, step by step. Soft tone. In 1963, just months after the crisis, a major agreement was signed, the Partial Nuclear Test Ban Treaty, an effort to reduce nuclear testing and slow down escalation. Pause. It wasn't perfect, but it was a start, because before this, there was almost no restraint. Now, there was awareness. Low reflective tone. Another major change was trust, or rather, the lack of blind trust, because both sides learned something uncomfortable. Even small misunderstandings could lead to massive consequences. Soft whisper. A delayed message, a misread signal, a single wrong assumption could end everything. Music builds tension slightly. So new systems were created, more verification, more caution, more communication, because assumptions were now seen as dangerous. Pause. And perhaps the biggest shift was psychological. Slow tone. Leaders became more careful, more measured, more aware of escalation. Because escalation is easy to start, but impossible to control. Soft heartbeat. This changed how future conflicts were handled. Wars didn't disappear, but they were managed differently, indirectly, carefully. Through proxy wars, negotiations, and controlled tensions. Because both sides knew direct conflict could lead to nuclear war. Pause. And nuclear war meant no winners. So instead of one massive war, the world entered something else, a long, controlled tension. The Cold War continued, but now with limits, with caution, with fear as a constant reminder. Soft whisper tone.
because once you've stood at the edge, you never forget how close it felt. Long pause. And that memory became a silent force, guiding decisions, preventing actions, slowing down moments that could have escalated. Music slowly fades. The Cuban Missile Crisis didn't end conflict, but it changed how conflict works, forever.
Part 11. Inside the Human Mind. History often talks about events, dates, decisions, outcomes, but rarely does it talk about something deeper. What it feels like to be inside those moments. Because behind every decision in the Cuban Missile Crisis were human minds, not machines, not perfect systems, people. And people feel pressure, fear, doubt, even at the highest level. Inside the White House, during those 13 days, there were no guarantees, no clear answers, no certainty, only choices and consequences. Imagine sitting in that room, knowing that your decision could lead to peace or nuclear war. That kind of pressure changes how the mind works. Studies later showed something important. Under extreme stress, humans don't always think clearly. They simplify, they rush, they rely on instinct. And instinct can be dangerous. Some advisors pushed for immediate attack, not because they wanted destruction, but because action feels safer than waiting. Doing something feels like control, even when it's risky. Others argued for patience, delay, observation, not because it was easier, but because it required restraint. And restraint is harder than action. This is what made leadership critical, because in moments like this, the leader sets the tone, fast or careful, aggressive or measured. John F. Kennedy chose something rare. He chose to slow down, to listen, to question, even when pressure demanded speed. That decision was not obvious, it was not easy, but it was critical. Because history shows us something powerful. Many crises don't escalate because people want them to. They escalate because people react too quickly. But in nuclear situations, that difference is everything. But it wasn't just leaders. Remember the submarine. Remember the moment when one man chose not to launch. Vasily Arkhipov. He wasn't in a palace. He wasn't surrounded by advisors. He was in a confined space, under pressure, with limited information. And still, he chose restraint. That tells us something important. History is not only shaped by powerful people. Sometimes it's shaped by individuals in unseen moments. Because in extreme situations, the line between disaster and survival is often just one decision. And that's the most powerful lesson of all. Systems matter, strategies matter, but in the end, it comes down to people. Their judgment, their restraint, their ability to stay calm when everything says panic. Because when the world stands on the edge, it's not power that pulls it back, it's control. History tells us what happened, but sometimes the real lesson comes from asking, what if it didn't? What if just one decision had gone differently? Let's go back. October 27th, 1962. The most dangerous day. The U-2 plane is shot down.
In reality, the United States chose restraint. But imagine if that decision had been different. Imagine Kennedy saying, "We must respond." Airstrikes launched, missile sites targeted, explosions across Cuba. At first, it would seem controlled, precise, military, but it wouldn't stay that way. Because those missile sites were not empty. Soviet forces were there, commanders on the ground, and remember, they had nuclear weapons. And in that moment, under attack, they might have believed war had already begun. So they respond, not with conventional weapons, but with nuclear ones. A missile launches from Cuba. Target, an American city, maybe Miami, maybe Washington, maybe New York. Within minutes, impact, mass destruction, hundreds of thousands gone instantly. Pause. The United States responds, not with one missile, but many, targeting the Soviet Union. Now it's no longer a crisis, it's nuclear war, full scale. The Soviet Union launches back, missiles cross the sky, from both sides, no defense, no escape. Because at that time, there was no system to stop them. Cities disappear, one by one. Washington, Moscow, New York, London. Millions become tens of millions, then hundreds of millions. Silence. And it doesn't stop there. A cold wind sound. The explosions create something else. Smoke, dust, debris rising into the atmosphere, blocking sunlight, lowering temperatures, destroying crops. This is called nuclear winter, a world where survival becomes uncertain, even for those who were not directly hit. Pause. Food shortages, economic collapse, global instability. A soft whisper. Civilization, as we know it, begins to break. Long silence. And all of this from one decision, one reaction, one moment where restraint was replaced by action. Now come back to reality, back to what actually happened. Heartbeat returns, calm. That decision was not made. The missile was not launched. The war did not begin. Pause. And that's what makes this story so powerful, not because of what happened, but because of what didn't. A soft emotional tone. Because history is often shaped not by actions taken, but by actions avoided. Final pause. And in October 1962, the world survived because enough people chose not to push the button.
Part 13. Why this still matters today. This story is not just history, it's a warning. Because even though the Cuban Missile Crisis ended in 1962, the conditions that created it still exist. Different countries, different leaders, different technologies, but the same core reality: power, fear, and the risk of miscalculation. Today, nuclear weapons haven't disappeared. In fact, they've become more advanced, more precise, more powerful, and in some ways, more dangerous. Because now, decisions can be made faster, missiles can travel quicker, and information moves instantly. Which sounds like an advantage, but it also creates a new risk. Less time to think, less time to verify, less time to pause. And as we've learned, pausing can save the world.
Music builds slightly. Modern conflicts may look different: cyber attacks, political tensions, regional wars, but underneath, the same patterns exist: escalation, reaction, misunderstanding. And that's what makes this story relevant, because the Cuban Missile Crisis teaches us something critical. The greatest danger is not always intention, it's misinterpretation. A radar signal mistaken, a message misunderstood, a move seen as aggression when it wasn't meant that way. And in a world with nuclear weapons, those misunderstandings can have irreversible consequences. But there's also something else, something hopeful. This story proves that even at the edge, humans can choose restraint, leaders can choose patience, individuals can choose not to act. And those choices matter more than power, more than weapons. Because in the end, technology doesn't decide, people do. And that means the future is not fixed. It depends on decisions yet to be made. So when we look back at 1962, it's not just a story about fear, it's a story about control, about thinking before acting, about understanding before reacting. And maybe that's the most important lesson of all. Because the world will face crises again, that's inevitable. But whether those crises become disasters depends on something simple: the choices we make in the moments that matter most.
There are moments in history that pass, and then there are moments that stay. Not in headlines, not in textbooks, but in the way people think, in the way leaders decide, in the quiet awareness that something once came very close. October 1962 was one of those moments. For 13 days, the world stood on the edge, not knowing if tomorrow would come. No explosions marked the end, no victory declared, just a slow return to normal. But normal was no longer the same, because behind that silence was understanding, a shared realization between enemies that there are limits, lines that should never be crossed. And for the first time, those limits were felt, not just understood. Because reading about destruction is different from almost experiencing it. John F. Kennedy and Nikita Khrushchev, two leaders, different nations, different ideologies, but in that moment they shared something rare: the responsibility of not ending the world. And they chose to step back. But maybe the most powerful part of this story is not what they did, it's what they didn't do. They didn't rush, they didn't react blindly, they didn't let fear decide. Because sometimes the strongest action is restraint. And sometimes the greatest victory is the disaster that never happens. Today, we live in a different world, more advanced, more connected, but not necessarily less fragile. Because the same forces still exist: power, fear, uncertainty. And the same question remains: when the next critical moment comes, will we choose reaction or restraint? Because history doesn't repeat itself exactly, but it rhymes. And somewhere in the background of every major decision, there is an echo from October 1962. A reminder, a warning, and maybe a guide. Because the world didn't end, not because it couldn't, but because enough people chose to keep it going.